Rep. Horrigan is here, so we will open up the hearing on House Bill 1075. Morning, welcome to ED&A.
Welcome. This may be a little bit more, I wish I'm in a somewhat awkward position because I signed it in favor of the bill and I'm the prime sponsor, the only sponsor, but actually I'm not in support of the amendment, notwithstanding the fact that it passed on consent. I support, I guess, one thing. I didn't participate as much in the process. I could have, because I did death in the family back at the same time the hearings were, and of course it was the House ED&A committee's bill anyways, so they can do anything they want to it. And they worked I think pretty hard on it. I'm thankful for the fact that they worked hard, and the rep who wrote the amendment is Representative Gould, who's sitting there. I'll leave it to her to explain what the rationale behind that version of it was. But basically, both versions of the bill were trying to get rid of the twice yearly changeover in the clocks from standard to daylight savings time. And I think even though that's deeply embedded in like everything that we do as a society, it's kind of a nonsensical thing to do, and it causes a lot of disruption, health issues, accidents, just general confusion every time we do it in March and November. And obviously, the whole idea of somehow you can like reschedule when the sun rises and sets is kind of silly. We can't do much about the sun. My first impression when I saw the bill is amended that it would mandate year-round daylight saving time rather than year-round standard time. So I was subsequently sure that the bill wouldn't do that, but but looking into some more, I think my first impression was correct, that it would lead to year-round daylight saving time here in the U.S., which means, and actually year-round daylight time is currently illegal in the U.S., but there is a perennial bill. They have perennial in the Congress. They have them just like we have here in Concord. They have them in Washington, D.C., and there's something called the Sunshine Protection Act, which Senator Marco Rubio from Florida, who we remember here in New Hampshire because he ran for president, and another Congressman Vern Buchanan, they've been doing it every year, and it hasn't gotten very far, so it's not in effect. But the amendment does refer to 15 U.S.C. Section 260A, which I guess could theoretically mandate daily savings time in the U.S. And so why that's a bad idea is basically because we're pretty near the center of the theoretical center of the Eastern time zone. If those of you which is 5 hours behind Greenwich Mean Time or Universal Coordinated Time, depending what you want to call it. There's like a widespread belief that our state, quote unquote, should be on Atlantic time, and there's perennial bills here in Concord to that effect. But actually, we're the only place in New England that, quote unquote, should be on standard time, Atlantic time, is just a little corner of Maine. So that's like a couple hundred miles east of here. If time zones don't follow the theoretical boundaries, but our time zone, Eastern time zone, it's the center of it is the 75th meridian west, which goes right through Philadelphia, and then it's 7.5 degrees of longitude east and west of there. So the eastern extent of that is around Machias, Maine. The western extent of that goes through either Detroit or Columbus, Ohio, which are on the same longitude. So that's so we're well within that boundary. Okay, yeah. So the reason why standard time is better, in my opinion, and there's a gentleman here who will give a much more detailed explanation. One is it's one of the main thing is it throws our circadian rhythms off. So like we really should have we need to have the sun coming up in the morning. It's good to have our clock time near the solar noon. The solar noon here in Concord would be about 15 minutes before 12 o'clock noon Eastern Standard Time, which is 1 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time. So it's good to have that as close as possible. And also during the winter, I mean, there isn't much sunlight to go around, but if we had daylight time all winter, and we tried this about 50 years ago and it didn't work, the sun would be getting up around 8. I think it would be getting up like after 8 a.m. for about a large portion of the late fall and early winter, and that would cause lots of traffic accidents. Kids would be waiting at bus stops in the dark. People would have a hard time waking up. So, even though there's only so much sunlight to go around, it's a good idea to have some of it in the morning when people are trying to get up and get to work and they don't have many artificial lights on. So it's better to have that in the morning rather than have it all like in the afternoon after work. And in the winter, even if we had daylight time, the sun would still go down pretty early in the afternoon anyway. That's kind of not something we can do much about, given we only have about 8.5 hours of sunlight in the winter. So, and anyway, the other thing, just to back, so what I'm asking the committee to consider is just going back to the original bill, which I guess means you'd have to have an amendment that says somebody would have to introduce an amendment, and I certainly will help you with that. And I've included a copy of the original bill, which of course would also be in the bill docket anyway, which the original bill, it's based on a model bill by the Coalition for Permanent Standard Time. Yes, there is a standard time lobby, and there's a supporter of it waiting to speak to you, actually. And they had bills for actually 48 of the 50 states. They don't have them for Arizona or Hawaii because they don't have daylight time in those two states. But and when you have a small state like ours, it's all in one time zone. The basic idea is they basically say that the time year-round shall be, in our case, Eastern Standard Time. That's the time officially defined as the astronomical time of the 75th degree of longitude, which, as I explained, goes right through Philadelphia. And then it would cross out a bunch of language that says how, when and how we switch to daylight time. And that's actually near and dear. I actually introduced a bill that established that language in it because our state law definition differed from the federal definition. And then what probably caused a certain amount of confusion is that the bill also ties it to neighboring states, because it's not a good idea, especially with. So I said this is contingent on similar laws being passed in Massachusetts and Maine, and Maine apparently passed the law Maine apparently has passed a law that would have year-round daylight savings time. Massachusetts hasn't taken action one way or another, although it's being considered down in Boston and probably just about every other state capital. And so that's I tied it to Maine and Massachusetts. Actually, the model bill also included Vermont, but for some reason I thought that would be simpler to just have those two states, and perhaps it would have been better if I had Vermont. And then the model bills for every state have their own neighboring states. So like the Massachusetts bill is contingent on, see if I have the exact list here: Connecticut, New Hampshire, New York, Rhode Island, and Vermont. And if we went down to New York, there's a big contingent on a bunch of other states and so forth and so on. So basically, every state in the Eastern time, nothing would happen until at least all, or at least almost all of the states in the East Coast followed suit, which I think is something that may happen at some point. So this is so that's basically, I'm asking you to go back to the original bill as originated, because I think having daylight savings time year-round is problematic, although it does, either version of the bill does eliminate one big problem, which is just the confusing, disruptive, and just totally absurd twice yearly clock change, so we don't have to spring forward and fall back. And
So Representative, if we stayed on standard time,
yes, that's what
that would mean my roosters would be crowing about 3:30 in the morning.
Well, roosters are going to do what they're going to do. So we have even less control over them than the sun. But
Rooster's gonna roost.
that's why I don't have any. Some of my neighbors do have urban chickens, and I sometimes hear them crowing, but it's not my thing in particular.
There you go.
But
Do we have any questions for the representative?
thanks.
All right, thank you for
Thank
your
you. Good,
testimony.
and good luck with the chickens.
Thank you. Rep Fellows.
Good morning. I'm Representative Sallie Fellows. I represent Plymouth, Ashland, and Holderness.
Thank
And my primary concern, you're getting written testimony, but I have a few additional things to tell you about. And I've also included a chart of the time zones on the back of your handouts. So you can just get some perspective on what happens. We know that, I think we know, that the federal government is the only one who can put us in the Atlantic time zone. We're prohibited, and the bill is stated in such a way that that's the only way that it would happen. But this gives you, and of course, their perspective would have to be for not just New Hampshire, for all the states that would be impacted by this. So you can look at the chart on the time zone chart and just think about, like, where would they consider setting that boundary? And it's this whole concept of making this switch started with Florida, and at least 15 years ago. And I think that what I read, I remember it from back then. I remember that they were talking about wanting to get more time for golf in the afternoon in the winter. So, but if you look up, if we put some of the states that are on the Atlantic coast, if they were moved into the Atlantic time zone, we're going to disconnect from the neighboring states to them. And I think that chart would start to look pretty unreasonable. Does the United States want 5 time zones instead of 4, and all those kinds of issues? But I'm going to stick to basically 2 issues. My biggest concern have to do with the students, and the fact that if we were to enact this bill as amended by the House, students would be waiting for the bus stop at 2 hours before sunup during the middle of the winter, and that clearly would be dangerous. In rural areas where there are no sidewalks, they'd be standing in the road waiting for the bus when there's snow around. So that is definitely a safety issue. And I think that maybe to a lesser extent, but I think it's also a safety issue for morning commuters, because the heaviest commute time from what I've experienced is between 7 and 8 in the morning. And during during December and January, that 7 to 8 hour commute would be totally in the dark. And for November and February, it would be partially in the dark. And in the middle of the winter, when we have a snowstorm, the plows are going to be out trying to clear up the road, and adding darkness to that just will make that even a more treacherous commute. So another aspect of how this will impact students is that we all know that high school students have a hard time getting up early in the morning, and that's due to hormonal changes that occurred during their teen years. And if we move this time zone so that it's dark and the sun doesn't come up until 8 o'clock in the morning, that's just going to make it harder for those kids to get up and get out of bed and get to school. So I'm asking you, should you think that you might want to pass this bill, please address the issue of what to do about the students going to school. Do you want to make some kind of requirement that the schools, shift their start time? I'm not suggesting that you do it. It's just like that seems to me an extremely important issue. So I think those are my major concerns. There are people who suggest that people have more heart attacks because we have a 1 hour change in the time. They lose 1 hour of sleep. I would just ask you to think of that, just use common sense to determine if 1 hour on one day is going to make any health concerns. I think a lot of times when I've heard on TV, including on ABC, Good Morning America, that when they talk about the time change, they conflate the science that says prolonged lack of sleep, which would be meaning getting, only 6 hours a night sleep for a prolonged period of time, definitely does impair people's ability, particularly in driving and things like that. But 1 hour on one night, I mean, is that reasonable to think that would make a difference? So that's the extent of my testimony. I'd be glad to answer any questions. This would be the third time I've testified on this bill.
Well, thank you. We appreciate your testimony. Questions from the committee? All right, seeing
Okay.
none, thank you. Rep. Gould?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee. Sherry Gould for the record from Merrimack 8, covering the towns of Warner, Bradford, and Henniker. So as I previously established, I am a farmer. My husband and I have a farm in Warner. And I was really excited when I saw this bill come in. And I've testified earlier to this committee, but to refresh all your memories, first time legislator, second year. So I'm still learning the ropes, right? I don't have the extensive experience many of you have had and other members of our committee of hearing this bill over and over and over and over again. However, I'm married to a logger and living on a farm. I was so excited because the time change is disruptive to farm life. You're right. It affects the animals. It affects my poor husband. Oh, every year I would hear about it for weeks in advance and he'd cry and complain about it because logging, it just really affected his life. He's in tune with the seasons. And we have a Native American saying that that kind of laughs about this whole notion, like as if you get any more length to the blanket by taking some off the top and putting it on the bottom. So the debate over which time is proper is way beyond my interest level. What did interest me was hearing all of this debate, and we heard lengthy debate, that there must be a way to resolve this and to not hear it over and over and over again like Groundhog Day. So what I found was that the NCSL, the National Conference on State Legislatures, is tracking these bills all across the country. And that I was very excited with Representative, my esteemed colleague, Representative Horrigan's suggestion that we look at our neighboring states, and we certainly heard a lot of testimony about that. So looking at the bill in Maine, which is highlighted on the website tracking these bills, I saw that that Maine had a law and it tied the change to the Congress making the change. So that's where I thought it would make sense for New Hampshire to have a statute that did exactly that. And then Representative Horrigan was interested in standard time. The Maine law currently says daylight savings time, but this year Maine had a bill in to change daylight savings time in their law to standard time, blah, blah, blah. Like I said, that debate goes back and forth. To me, what mattered was that we get a law on the books. Standard time was what Representative Horrigan wanted, and it was what we currently seem to be leaning toward in New Hampshire. So that's what we went with. If and when Congress ever does make the change, New Hampshire certainly can talk then and have the lengthy debate about the research and which end of the blanket you want to put that time on and what makes the most sense. But for now, we could at least join, I think it's, I have an extensive handout for you that in all the excitement about the previous bill, I forgot to print out, but I will email that to all of you. So it gives all of these, it gives this website, and I think it was 11 states are lit up on the map, including Maine. And so we just get on the map. Our Congress people will be watching this to see what are the states doing. And when there's a preponderance of states, I believe they'll finally take this up in Congress and pass it. But then I've been accused of having rose-colored glasses, so we'll see.
The eternal optimist. Well, thank you, Representative. Questions from the committee? All right, seeing none, thank you. Scott Spradling.
Good morning, Senators.
Good morning. Good
Nice to see all of you. My name is Scott Spradling. I am here representing the New Hampshire Association of Broadcasters in this conversation. We represent roughly 60 to 65 radio stations and radio station groups, as well as the state's 2 television stations, WMUR, which is owned by Hearst TV, and New Hampshire Public Television. It's a pleasure to be here and talking to you. I feel like this is a little bit of a version of Groundhog Day, only now we're waiting to pop up and see what time zone we're in. I wanted to express on behalf of the association some very real and economic impact concerns that we have about basically the entire conversation. We've been here before speaking as a universal group, essentially urging state lawmakers to be really, really careful about tinkering with what we're talking about. And I think the conversation you've already heard this morning is a really good microcosm of the problems that could be created with what feels like a ready, fire, aim approach to figuring out what the time zone bill should look like. Raise your hand if you're totally confused with Atlantic savings, daylight savings, Eastern savings, and everybody seems to be going in a completely different direction, which is really a bad idea when you're talking about time zones. Because the practical impact of this, which is something nobody seems to be talking about, is we could end up with states taking different positions, Congress lifting the barrier for making these changes, and the results of these conversations, which is a very real one because the New Hampshire bill you're looking at right now is daylight savings. Maine passed Eastern savings time. So we could end up with our 6 small states having different time zones within those areas that were decisions made by the states. From a radio and TV perspective, to bring it home, there are numerous radio station groups. Town Square Media, which is primarily on the eastern part of the state, headquartered in Rochester, Dover, but broadcasting into Maine and having Maine stations there. Great Eastern Radio on the opposite side of New Hampshire, which broadcasts largely in Lebanon and Claremont, but has Vermont radio TV stations. iHeartMedia, which is Rock 101, WGIR. They have national interests. They broadcast up and down the eastern seaboard. Saga Communications, which is primarily Keene and New Hampshire based, but broadcasts down into Massachusetts. We have radio station signals that cross state lines that have uniform programming that would be a hot mess of keeping track of the programming changes if we have these shifts that don't involve the entire region and arguably the entire eastern seaboard. This is really a conversation that needs to be pressured by states to Congress to act on behalf of all 50, not to empower states to make the kinds of decisions that states are trying to make right now. It just sets up a really complicated and backwards conversation. And I think it's important that we sort of remember our history here. Time zones were implemented in 1883. The Brooklyn Bridge opened in 1883, and the first electricity overhead lines were used in New Jersey in 1883. Safe to say, those lines came way before technology, broadcasting, and commerce turned our states into a far closer weaved patchwork quilt than what I think we had well over 100 years ago. So I think the idea of daisy chaining, which is sort of what it feels like we're trying to do here, will go if Massachusetts and Vermont may go, but what about Connecticut and Maine? And by connecting it that way, but going in completely different directions, it threatens the revenue streams. Advertisers rely on consistency in radio and television. It's what our systems are built on. New Hampshire has a much higher per capita radio listening audience than many other states because we're older than average. So those advertising dollars are not only essential to the radio stations that operate every day, but essential to the advertisers that are hoping people are awake. So especially with due difference to the things we can't change, like when the rooster crows and the sun starts to shine, I think there are ways in which we can do this that make a lot more sense than taking any approach like this with a bill like this. This really has to be congressional action for all 50 states. And my feeling is if, for those who think that this kind of a bill is a really good idea, there's a bridge in Brooklyn I think you might want to look at purchasing. And with that, I'll wrap up my testimony.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Questions from
much.
the committee? We are happy to see that our legislature does represent the median age of New Hampshire.
Yeah, certainly. And thank you for listening.
All right, Michael Garrahan. Morning, welcome.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Mike Garrahan. I am a volunteer with Save Standard Time. It's been a while since I visited your state, but I'm pleased to see that the granite curbs are still here. I agree with everything Representative Horrigan said. We supported his original version of the bill to keep standard time year-round and oppose the House committee amendment to make it year-round daylight time. Daylight saving time is popular by association with summer, and I don't hold that against anyone, but people undervalue morning light unless they are deprived of it, as in the winter of 1974. History and science show that it matters which way we end daylight saving time changes, and standard time is the better way. So if I go too long, I would welcome a 1-minute warning. Anyway.
Would it be wrong to give you that now? I'm teasing, go ahead.
It's all right.
But feel free to just give us the highlights.
Sure. So on the history, daylight saving time was invented by a morning person who wished night people would get up earlier. And no, that was not Benjamin Franklin. He wrote a fun essay in 1784 about how much Parisians could save on candles if they got up earlier during the months from March to September. And he suggested several incentives, such as a tax on window shutters or cannon fire at sunrise. Changing the clocks is conspicuously absent from that essay. And in those days, the general agreement was local midday was 12 o'clock. That's been formalized as local mean time. Greenwich Mean Time is just a Greenwich-specific version of that. As Mr. Bradley mentioned, the railroads implemented time zones in 1883. The principle behind them is sound. When the train station in Concord adopted standard time that fall, that was only 14 minutes behind Concord Mean Time. Eastern Daylight Time is 46 minutes ahead. Another thing you might have heard is that daylight saving time is for farmers. They are also innocent of this. When the U.S. adopted daylight saving time as a wartime measure in 1918, the farmers didn't like it, and they organized to get it repealed in 1919. It was the Boston Chamber of Commerce and other similar organizations who kept it going. I looked into the history and learned that New Hampshire admirably held off using daylight saving time until 1937. In 1942, we brought daylight saving time back nationally as another wartime measure. It was called wartime, and it was year-round. By the time the war ended in 1945, people were pretty tired of it, and were happy to go back to standard time. In the post-war period, each state made their own daylight saving rules, and it got pretty chaotic, so Congress acted in 1966 with the Uniform Time Act saying, here's the national schedule, you may either follow it or keep standard time year-round. Those are the choices. In 1973, we had an oil embargo, and Congress responded to that by trying to make daylight saving time year-round again. The original plan was for 2 winters, but after the first winter, there was a lot of public concern about safety on winter mornings, and Congress said, we made a mistake. 1 winter like that was enough. Let's fall back again in October 74. It also didn't save that much energy. And today, with efficient lighting, like in this room, and desktop computers everywhere, and also air conditioners everywhere, it just doesn't save any energy at all, as far as we know. As to the science, in the last 20 years or so, people who study biological rhythm have established that while there are other drivers, the strongest driver of human circadian rhythm is the light and dark cycle. In the morning, the light stimulates cortisol, which promotes alertness. In the evening, the darkness stimulates melatonin, which promotes sleepiness. Daylight saving time, unfortunately, delays both. And people on average, get 19 minutes less sleep throughout daylight saving season than they do during standard time season. There have been many studies of transition effects. These often make the news. But these only show us that the transition itself is bad. They don't really show us which mode is better. Studies which go out on that limb tend to be less rigorous about that. The studies that do shed light on which choice is better have been the ones that look at people's position within the time zone. And they've found that the longitudes farther west have higher rates of cancer and diabetes or fatal vehicle accidents. A good summary of this research is by Till Roneberg in an article titled Daylight Saving Time and Artificial Time Zones, a Battle Between Biological and Social Times. We also got some information from Russia's experiment with year-round daylight saving time in 2011 through 2014. There's a researcher named Borisenkov who found that adolescent mental health fared better under year-round standard time than it did under either seasonal or year-round daylight time. So to get to our objections to the present bill, it cites US 15th US Code 260A, but does not comply with it and has no effect without an act of Congress. The Sunshine Protection Act, which the US Senate passed in 2022 and woke up the sleep doctors, had to start over when the new Congress was seated in 2023. And if it passed, the effect would probably be similar to 1974. The bandwagon of states passing laws for year-round daylight time has slowed down quite a bit since then. Only 2 states have passed bills in both chambers in the past 3 years. And in the Northwest, some states this year got together informally to work together to pass year-round standard time because they were tired of waiting for Congress to act. Oregon and Ohio got a bill passed in one chamber, but not the other. I'm sorry, Oregon and Idaho. So if the House committee amendment passes for this bill, New Hampshire residents will either wonder why they're still changing clocks, or they will complain about winter morning darkness when they experience it. Standard time has the advantages that states can actually do it under US law, and that doctors recommend it. The American Academy of Sleep Medicine has led the way on this, and the American Medical Association backs them up. It doesn't make schools scramble to maintain their present level of safety. I looked and saw that the high school in Concord starts at 7:45 a.m. And if we had daylight saving time in the winter, the sun would rise later than that for nearly 3 months. So I would echo Representative Horrigan's position that the original bill we support, but the one before you right now, as amended by the House committee, we would oppose. I thank you for listening.
Well, thank you. That was very informational. Questions from the committee? All right, seeing none. All right, I don't have anybody else to testify on House Bill 1075, so we'll close the hearing.